Alrighty, good evening and great games at your table. I'm Jonathan Albin and this is Game Master's Guide. Tonight we're going to be talking about role playing as we always do, but I want to talk to you in particular about a subject you may not have considered, and that would be the valence of storytelling. In the world of tabletop role-playing games, or TTRPGs, storytelling has always been the heart of the experience. But somewhere along the way, the valence of these stories, that is, their emotional charge and meaningful impact, has started to fade. We're going to discuss this in particular and talk about the details of how this has happened and how we can perhaps reverse or prevent this from occurring. But first, hit all the buttons down below and let the algorithm know that you are part of our audience. Let's begin getting our mind around this concept of valence as it applies to tabletop RPGs and to social interactions overall. This word valence that I'm using, of course, we've heard terms similar to it, but this valence to me kind of shows the connection between the experience of play and the energy and intensity of choices, relationships, and events within the narrative of a role-play game. This mirrors its original scientific usage in chemistry and in the word's root, the capacity to bond. Now, in the case of role-play games, we're going to be referring to these valent bonds in terms of whether they are high valent or low valence moments. Now, in the case of high valence moments, these are charged, powerful events, major turning points, life-altering decisions, and explosive conflicts that reshape the world's trajectory within the framework, of course, of that role-play environment. The deeper that environment, the more value these high valence moments will represent. Now, this doesn't demean or undermine in any way those lower valence moments, because those are the subtle undercurrents, the quiet interactions, small choices, and even perhaps background developments that seem minor but hold the narrative together to give us a place to work from. In the Nycos system, this allows every part of the story, from the grand battles to the quiet campfire conversations, to carry some degree of narrative strength. Now, beyond raw narrative, valence also captures the significance or meaning of the events. It's not just about what happens, but why it matters to the characters, to the world, and to the players themselves. This means that you're looking at valence in terms of how it might affect a character's identity, perhaps their beliefs, or their relationships. Now, in modern play, this is not going to be seen as much because current mechanisms simply don't have a method for adding this impact. Furthermore, when you're talking about the valence of a situation in gameplay, it really is a matter of how the choices that are made affect the broader world. Now, in the case of Nykos, every single decision that's made has some impact. Now, does it shift alliances, alter history, or challenge existing power structures? Maybe not. But by embedding meaning into the valence framework, you can ensure that the story isn't just mechanically engaging, it's emotionally resonant. Now, tying back to the shared etymology with value, valence also represents the worth of a narrative element. Every scene, therefore, can be perceived as part of this process. We're going to be looking at it for its emotional significance, about its impact and lasting influence on the story, or the choices within the larger ecosystem of your game's environments. Now, in the case of Nykos, we deal with the narrative worth. What does the particular element in the story how does it contribute to the greater tapestry of the adventure? Does it enrich the lore? Perhaps it deepens character development, or it maybe even inspires new stories. But beyond just the narrative worth, we also need to look at the player investment. How much does the story matter to the players? If they are personally invested in the outcomes, they will feel like their actions have value within the game world and on the larger sense, the real world community of players. This aspect of valence ensures that every contribution matters, whether it's a single session or a campaign that becomes canon. Many games have become formulaic, focusing on mechanical mastery of particular abilities, certain numeric improvements that gain importance for the persona, but have very little in terms of narrative resonance. Players are constantly min-maxing, using the older term, or more currently, they optimize their character builds and conquer the prepackaged, pre-formatted adventures that have been produced incessantly by the manufacturers. But how often do these stories linger after the dice have stopped rolling? How frequently do they display any form of relevance beyond just the mere pleasure of the action? How often do those in-game decisions change us as players and game masters? I believe it's time for an upgrade. It's a time for us to make the stories mean something again. Boy, that sounds like certain politics, doesn't it? All right. What I'm really talking about is looking at where TTRPGs have existed throughout time and look at how their relevance has shifted. TTRPGs have always existed at the intersection between play and life, a space where imagination allows us to explore ideas, relationships, and even parts of ourselves that we might not have been able to confront in everyday life. Certainly there are situations for a character that will make us reconsider our actual lives as well. But somewhere along the way, most games have seemed to have lost that balance between play and life. The focus has been shifted, intentionally or unintentionally, towards the mechanics over meaning. We've become more concerned with leveling up the characters that we play. Lost my place. We become more concerned with leveling up than growing, both as characters and people. The magic of role-playing isn't just about the escapism, while that certainly is a part and is, quite frankly, perhaps paramount in the majority of play space. But it's not about just that. It's about using that escape to reflect on why it's important to look at reflecting the real-world experiences, challenges, and emotions, and how the role play provides us with the mechanism. Now, in NycosRPG, we approach storytelling through the lens, therefore, of valence and covalence. Every choice carries some sort of emotional charge, whether it's a dramatic, world-shaping decision or a quiet, personal, introspective moment. And these choices don't exist in isolation. They create covalent bonds between the players and the world, and players and each other, and even players with their characters that don't just shape the story, but demonstrate and reflect the relationship between those players and their characters. Now, by reigniting this concept of play-life balance, I want to make it clear that we're not just playing games. We're now engaging in a transformative storytelling mechanism that resonates beyond the table. If you haven't been experiencing that, perhaps you understand a little bit of what I'm talking about. There are places and there are means by which what you do as you play can alter and inform your processes in real life. Modern cultures have embraced the concept of gamification. The idea of taking game-like mechanics and trying to apply them to everything from fitness apps to education to training and social modification. While gamification can motivate behavior, it also risks reducing complex human experiences to mere points, achievements, and rewards, and removing them from the heartfelt emotional basis where games thrive. In tabletop role-playing games, this hubris often manifests as mechanical dominance. Players optimize their stats, calculate the most efficient strategies for utilizing those numbers, and treat encounters more like puzzles to be solved rather than narratives to be experienced. The story has become secondary, in effect, to the system. But life isn't a game, and not everything meaningful can be measured in experience point or cash income. In Nikos, we challenge this mindset by emphasizing valence over mechanics. A choice isn't made valuable because it earns you points. It's valuable because of the emotional resonance that it generates between you and the world and you and the players and the other characters. The relationships within the game that it affects, and the world that it shapes both in and out of the game. We don't play for the sake of winning. We play to explore, to connect, and ultimately to evolve as people. Now, many of the TTRPGs, and I think this is perhaps more current, more modern than it was in the past, but they strive for some form of cultural equivalency. The idea that all factions, races, and societies within the game world must be somehow balanced and equal. While this can foster fairness in mechanics, it often flattens the rich, complex dynamics that makes stories so compelling. In the real world, cultures aren't equal. They're interconnected, shaped by history, power, and shared experiences. Trying to impose strict equivalency in games, and see there's the word valency right there, equivalency, in games can obscure these nuances, leading to shallower world builds and simplistic conflicts, again, those that can be measurable and defined outside of the experiential realm. Instead of aiming at this cultural equivalency, therefore, Nikos embraces the idea of relative covalence. Cultures, factions, and characters aren't defined by their equality, but by the bonds they share, the histories they carry, and the valence of their interactions. Again, a situation that has a high valence value is going to be world-shifting, thought-inducing, and such, whereas a low valence interaction simply will improve the character's awareness and interaction with the world. This allows for richer, more dynamic storytelling than reflected in the complexity that reflects the complexity of the real world. In many games, ideology is treated as superficial, just another layer of lore, just another checkbox on a character sheet, just another day in the life. But ideologies actually shape stories in profound ways. They influence how the characters see the world, how they interact and judge the world, and how they respond to any conflicts that might arise. When ideology is reduced to mere semantics, we miss out on the opportunity to explore meaningful philosophical questions, shallow or deep, within our games. Now, what does it mean to value freedom over control if you can't express that? How do we navigate the tension between truth and power? Or purity of philosophy and potential change? In the Nikos system, the veils represent 10 core philosophies, each with their own valence, shaping how the characters and factions engage with each other and with the world. These ideologies aren't just window dressing. They're not just a click on a graph someplace, but they are the driving forces between conflicts, alliances, and personal growth. By treating ideology as a living, breathing part of the narrative, therefore, we can elevate storytelling from its core of entertainment and move it into individual and cultural exploration. Now, in many tabletop RPGs, Encounters are merely little more than speed bumps. They're obstacles to be numerically overcome before moving on to the next part of the story. The progress, therefore, of the story misses the point. These encounters are the story. Every encounter, whether it's a battle, a negotiation, moral dilemma, or even internal thought processes, carries its own valence. The connection between the game mechanics are basically overdrawn with the very concept of what it is to engage. It's not just about defeating the enemy or solving the puzzle. It's about how these encounters challenge the characters, test their relationships, and shape their journey. In Nykos, encounters are designed to be and to create these valence shifts. These moments where the story evolves because of how the players engaged with it. A combat encounter might lead to a fragile alliance. A failed negotiation might spark a rebellion. Every encounter that has the potential to transform the world, and it's up to the players and their characters to determine precisely how this will be the case. This emphasis on every decision having merit and value really is clearly the reason to consider this mechanism. Too often, the conflicts in a TTRPG are considered to be diversions, red herrings, temporary challenges that don't leave a lasting impact. The characters are simply pursuing their advancement in their story, and they are not allowing the conflicts to serve their purpose. In real life, conflicts are how we grow. It's only when we face difficulties and learn how to confront our own values, question our assumptions, and adapt to new realities that we can become more. In Nykos, conflicts aren't just diversions, they're actually the catalysts for character evolution. Whether it's a personal struggle between individual characters or a large-scale war between factions, and my Nykos players know where we are now, but these both carry high valence and create opportunities for this covalent growth. They're not just obstacles to be overcome. They are literally moments for persona transformation. At the end of the day, tabletop RPGs are about stories. But too often these stories are confined to individual sessions or campaigns. Once the game ends, the story ends. Flat, done, move on. But what if the stories didn't end when the session did? What if every game was part of a larger evolving narrative, one that connected players, campaigns, and communities across time and space? Now that's the vision behind Nykos. Every session is a chapter in a story that's bigger than any one player or group or even game master. The choices you make, the relationships you build, and the conflicts you navigate don't just affect your game, they can actually become part of the living history of the Nykos collective. Now, this isn't about just playing a game. This is about being part of this shared journey, a covalent network of stories, ideas, players, and game masters that evolve with every roll of the dice. TTRPGs have also been more than just games. They are windows into worlds, mirrors of the game masters, and bridges between the players that are involved. They give us a chance to explore not only who we are, but how we connect with others, and how we can shape the stories to resonate long after the dice have stopped rolling. I realize that most people are familiar with the idea of having a debrief or a game session after the session, so to speak, where you entertain these ideas of how the stories connect. But somewhere along the way, we've lost sight of the magic that this actually creates within the world. In a world obsessed with optimization, gamification, mechanical mastery, storytelling has taken a back seat. Adventures have become predictable, characters one-dimensional, and encounters fundamentally formulaic. Players are more focused on winning on determining success or failure within the encounter and what kind of experience that they can get, but they're not focused on the experience itself. They are more interested in imitating existing tropes than imagining new possibilities. And what happens if we stay on this path? We risk the death of tabletop role-playing games as we know them and a replacement with a automatic and numeric fiasco. Think about it. If we reduce tabletop role-playing games to mere mechanics and stats, we strip everything away from them that made them special, the story. Without meaningful narratives, the emotional charge, the valence of the game experience is lost. The connections between the players now become shallow, the worlds we build become hollow, and the sessions we play just become just another pastime. No different than any other of the disposable entertainments that we now find ourselves faced with. If we keep treating encounters as checklists, conflicts as diversions, and stories as simply one-off sessions, we're not just missing the point, but we are killing the potential for what TTRPGs can be. Why does this happen? What happens when the imagination dies? People simply stop showing up. It may be that you've had this experience on your own. You play a game for 2 or 3 weeks, players lose interest, the episodes fall apart. New players won't see the point in joining a world that feels static, predictable, and meaningless. Veterans will grow tired of the same old mechanical loops, particularly when they've already gleaned all of the tricks and tips that can be described in the meta environment that has no story soul. But therefore, without meaningful stories, what are we left with? But here's the thing. The stories don't have to be that way. We have the capability to reignite the magic of our tabletop role-playing games, to bring meaning back into our stories, to shift from mechanical play to emotional engagement, from individual adventures to shared evolution as the stories grow and we interact. In the world of Nykos, we don't just roll dice and move tokens on a map. We create this valence, this emotional narrative charge, because every choice matters. Through covalence, we build the bonds beyond the game that transcend it, connecting players, their characters, and stories in a way that is truly transformational. When we embrace this model, tabletop role-play games become more than just games. They become tools for growth, space for connection, catalysts for change. Imagine a world where every session you leave, you do so not just entertained, but challenged and changed. Where the stories you tell ripple into the lives of others. Where your character's evolution mirrors your own and the bonds you form at the table last long after the game is over. That's the future we're building. What this comes down to is that Nykos isn't just an RPG system. It's a living world view, a shaped process by which players build the story that they're living in and play into these stories that they tell. Now, if you're tired of the same old formulas, if you're looking for a game that challenges you to think deeply, connect meaningfully, and grow as a player and a person, I charge you with checking out NycosRPG. If you believe stories matter and that games can be more than just entertainment, it's time to upgrade your tabletop role-playing experience. It's time to make the story mean something. Join the vanguard, shape the future, play Nykos. See you next time.